You clicked because you saw a shelter that looks wrong. Too small, too cheap, too simple to be legal. And somehow, in 41 states, it is. I went looking for why. I spent 3 weeks buried in old building bulletins and county records. What I found stopped me cold. There are homes people built for less than the cost of a used car. Homes that stood for 80 years. And the reason you cannot build them today has nothing to do with whether they are safe. This is old poor man's knowledge. It kept families warm and dry through the Great Depression, through 2 wars, through winters that killed livestock in the fields, and it was quietly written out of the rule books, 1 county ordinance at a time. I am going to walk you through 25 of these designs, the way I uncovered them. But the one that stopped me longest came from a 1936 federal pamphlet I found scanned in a university archive at 2 in the morning. I will save that for the end, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And every single one of these works for someone with almost nothing to spend right now. Let me start where I started, with a hole in the ground. The first thing I dug up was the dugout. Not the baseball kind, the prairie kind. When settlers pushed into Nebraska and the Dakotas in the 1870s, there were no trees, no lumber for 100 miles. So they cut into the side of a hill, squared off a room, and roofed it with sod and poles. That was the house. I almost dismissed it. Sounded miserable. Then I found the numbers. The University of Nebraska has kept records on these, and here is what shocked me. A dugout held a steady temperature year-round because the earth around it never dropped below about 52 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 feet down. In summer, it stayed cool. In winter, a single small fire kept the whole room warm. Families burned a fraction of the fuel their wood-frame neighbors did. A woman named Grace Snyder, who lived in one as a girl in the 1880s, wrote that their dugout cost them almost nothing but their own labor, and about $2.50 in nails and a window. $2.50. And it stood. So, why can't you build one now? Here is the first clue, and it is a strange one. It is not because they collapse. It is because most modern building codes require a permanent foundation, a minimum ceiling height, and egress windows of a specific size in every sleeping room. A dugout fails all 3 on paper, even though families raise children in them safely for 2 generations. That bothered me. Because a rule that says a home is illegal, while people are living safely in that exact kind of home, is not a safety rule. It is something else. And the deeper I dug, the more I saw the same fingerprints on every design. But the dugout was just dirt and desperation. The next one was different. The next one was engineered to last a century, and it did. That one was the sod house proper. Not dug into a hill, but built up from the ground with bricks of cut prairie turf. The settlers called it Nebraska marble. They cut the sod into blocks about 1 foot wide and 2 feet long, thick roots holding the soil together like natural rebar, and they stacked them grass side down into walls, 3 feet thick. 3 feet. Think about what that means. The University of Nebraska Extension documented sod walls that gave insulation no modern stick-built wall comes close to. The thick earth held heat in winter and blocked it in summer. Fireproof because it is dirt. Windproof because it is heavy. Tornado country, and these squat little houses shrugged off winds that flattened frame houses around them. I found a record of one sod house in Custer County, Nebraska, that a man named Isidore Halmont built in 1884, 2 full stories of sod. It stood until the 1960s, over 80 years, before it was finally torn down. 80 years, from a material that cost him nothing but sweat. Here is where the tension started building for me, because I kept asking, if these were free and they lasted, why did we ever stop? And the answer I kept finding was not that something better came along. The answer was that somebody decided free was a problem. But I am getting ahead of myself, because the sod house needed a prairie. Not everybody had one. So people in other places found other free materials. And the third design uses something you would throw in the trash today: newspaper and straw and clay. Down through the poorer counties of the American South and up into Appalachia, people built with what old-timers called mud and stud, and further back with a mix they packed by hand out of clay, sand, and straw. In Europe, they called it cob. No forms, no bricks, just wet earth sculpted into walls 2 feet thick and left to dry hard as low-grade stone. The oldest cob houses in England are still lived in after 500 years. 500. I checked that twice because I did not believe it. There are cottages in Devon occupied today that were built before Columbus sailed. The material does not rot, does not burn, and costs, in raw form, essentially nothing. Dirt from your own yard, straw from a field, water, and here is the frugal genius of it. A cob wall needs no wood frame, no insulation, no drywall, no siding. The wall is the whole thing at once. One material does the job that modern construction needs 6 materials to do, each one bought and hauled and paid for. So I sat there thinking, this is the answer. This is the poor man's house. Why is nobody building these? And then I found the ordinances. Because in most of the country, you cannot get a permit for an earthen wall home unless you pay an engineer to certify a material that has held up roofs for 5 centuries. The certification alone can cost more than the whole house. It was not one villain. It was a slow tightening, and it started in earnest after the Second World War. When I traced the timeline, the pattern jumped out. Before the war, most of America built its own homes or hired a local man who used local methods. There was no national rule book. A poor family could put up a safe, cheap house from the ground under their feet. Then came the building code boom. Between the late 1940s and the 1970s, model building codes spread from the cities into the counties and then into the countryside. On the surface, the reason was safety, and some of it truly was. But buried in those codes were rules that had nothing to do with whether a house would stand, minimum square footage. Many places set a floor, sometimes 1,000 square feet or more, below which a house simply could not be built. Mandatory connection to municipal utilities, required foundations of poured concrete, minimum lot sizes. Each rule, on its own, sounds reasonable. Stacked together, they made the cheap house illegal and the expensive house mandatory. I found a phrase in an old planning document that I have not been able to forget. It describes substandard housing, and when I read the definition, substandard did not mean unsafe. It meant small. It meant cheap. It meant built by the people who lived in it rather than by a licensed contractor pulling permits. And that is the engine under all 41 states. Not a conspiracy in a back room. 1,000 small ordinances, each one making it a little more illegal to be poor and housed at the same time. Now you understand why these designs were banned. So let me show you the ones that scared the code writers the most, because those are the ones you can still learn from. The 4th design is the Quonset style, the round roof shelter. During the war, the Navy needed shelter fast and cheap, so they mass-produced a curved, corrugated steel hut named after Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where they first built them in 1941. After the war, surplus Quonset huts flooded the country, and returning veterans bought them for a few $100s and turned them into homes. The curve is the secret. A rounded roof sheds wind and snow and carries its own load with no interior support posts. There are Quonset homes from the 1940s still standing and lived in today, having survived hurricanes that leveled the subdivisions next door. A family could roof and wall themselves for the price of a month's rent. But a round steel house does not fit a code written for square wood houses, and it does not fit a neighborhood covenant written to keep property values a certain shape. So the Quonset home got zoned out of most residential areas, not because it failed, but because it looked poor. Look poor. Hold on to that phrase, because it turns out to be the real crime in a lot of these ordinances. not being unsafe, looking poor. And the next design got banned almost entirely for how it looked, even though it may be the toughest cheap wall ever invented. The fifth design is the earthbag home. You take polypropylene bags, the same feed sacks a farmer buys by the bundle. You fill them with the dirt already under your feet. You stack them like giant bricks. You tamp them flat, and you run a strand of barbed wire between the courses to lock them together. Plaster the outside, and you have a wall that stops bullets and outlasts the man who built it. An architect named Nader Khalili developed the modern version and brought it to a California institute in the 1980s. And here is the part that got me. He tested these against the California building standards, the strictest earthquake code in the nation, and they passed. They passed the toughest seismic testing in America. The dirt in the bags cost nothing. The bags cost pennies. The wire costs a few dollars a roll. I sat with that a long while. A wall that passes California earthquake code, made from dirt and old sacks for almost no money. And yet in most counties you still cannot permit one, because the code has no category for it, and no category means no permit, and no permit means illegal. That is the trap in plain sight. It is not that these homes fail the tests. It is that they are not allowed to take the test. The rule book simply has no box to check, and a house with no box is an outlaw. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking this is fine for a man with a plot of land and a strong back, but you are on a fixed income in an apartment, and you do not have dirt to bag or a hill to dig into. You think this whole thing is for people with money and land to start with. This next part is built for you, specifically for you, because the oldest poor man's shelter knowledge was never really about building a whole house. It was about staying alive and warm and dry for almost nothing wherever you are, and that knowledge costs you close to zero. Here is the first piece, and it comes straight out of Depression-era survival. Heat the person, not the space. In the 1930s, families who could not afford to warm a whole house warmed a single small zone in their own bodies. The trick they used, and it is documented in home economics bulletins from that decade, was the heated enclosure, a small table, a heavy blanket draped over it to the floor, and a single safe heat source underneath. In Japan, they call this a kotatsu, and they have used it for 600 years. The Depression housewife did the same with what she had. You sit with your legs under the covered table. The blanket traps the warmth. Your whole body stays warm on a tiny fraction of the energy it takes to heat a room. I tested a version of this myself last winter. One small heat source under a covered table kept me comfortable in a cold room while the thermostat on the wall said 58 degrees. The savings on a heating bill over a winter can run into real money, and it cost me a blanket I already owned. Here is the second piece for the person with nothing. Window insulation from the inside, the way our grandparents did it before storm windows were a purchase. Most of a home's heat leaks out through the glass. The old fix was to trap a layer of still air against the window, because still air is one of the best insulators there is, and it is free. They used to tack up a second layer over the window, sometimes just clear material, sometimes an old sheet, creating a dead air pocket. Cornell and other extension services have measured this and found a simple interior window covering can cut the heat loss through that glass dramatically. You can do it tonight with tape and any clear film you have. Even the plastic, a mattress, or a piece of furniture came wrapped in. $0 if you saved the wrapping, a few dollars if you did not. That was the moment my suspicion hardened into something colder, because now I could see the shape of it. The materials are free. The labor is your own. But the permission is not free, and the permission is where they got you. And if you want to go deeper into exactly how that trap was built and how people slipped through it anyway, I put the most actionable of this research into a series of books. Poor Man's Edge, Poor Man Advanced, and Poor Man's System go through these methods one by one, the practical details you can actually use, the workarounds that still exist, and the full picture of what was taken and what can still be recovered. You will find the links in the description below. I need to stop here and tell you who they is, because up to now I have been dancing around it, and you deserve the truth I found. And the third piece, the one nobody thinks of. Seal the bottom of your doors with a rolled towel or a tube of fabric stuffed with rags. The old folks called it a draft snake. One drafty door under a house can pull cold air across your floor all night. A rolled towel stops it. Free. You have the towel. You have the rags. You do it in 5 minutes and you feel the difference the same night. None of these require land, a permit, a landlord's permission, or a purchase. They are the portable core of poor man's shelter wisdom, and they were common knowledge in every household in this country 90 years ago. Then we were taught to just turn up the heat and pay the bill. The knowledge did not fail. It was replaced with a monthly charge. But let me get back on the trail, because the buried designs get stranger from here, and the reasons they were banned get harder to defend. The sixth design is the pole barn house, or as the old-timers called it, post frame. Instead of a full concrete foundation and a stud wall, you set sturdy posts into the ground and build the whole structure off those posts. Barns have stood this way for centuries. It uses a fraction of the concrete, a fraction of the lumber, and it goes up fast. For generations, people lived in post-frame buildings with no trouble. But then residential codes began demanding a continuous perimeter foundation for any dwelling, and the pole house, cheaper and perfectly sound, got shoved into the barn-only category. You can build it for your cows. You cannot legally sleep in it. Think about what that says. The law would rather you spend 3 times as much on concrete than let you keep the money. The seventh design is the straw bale house. Farmers baling straw had a waste product, the straw left after the grain was taken, worth almost nothing. In the sandhills of Nebraska in the 1890s, once baling machines arrived, but before the railroad brought cheap lumber, settlers stacked straw bales like giant bricks and plastered them. Some of those original straw bale homes lasted over 100 years. The walls are around 18 inches to 2 feet thick, and their insulating value is off the charts, far beyond a modern insulated wall. A straw bale house holds heat like a thermos. Fire tests, done by extension researchers, found that a plastered straw bale wall actually resists fire better than a standard wood frame wall because the packed straw has no oxygen to burn. The material is a farm byproduct that in many places is nearly free. And still, in most jurisdictions, you fight for years to permit one. A few states finally wrote straw bale codes in the last decade or so, but for most of the country it remains an orphan, allowed nowhere and forbidden everywhere by simple omission. The eighth is the tiny home on a foundation, and here the ban is nakedly about size. I told you earlier about minimum square footage rules. In many towns you cannot build a house smaller than a set number, often somewhere around 1,000 square feet. A person who wants to build 400 square feet, debt-free, and owe no one, is forbidden. Not because a small house is dangerous, but because the code declares smallness itself a defect. I found the origin of a lot of these minimum size rules, and it is uglier than I expected. Many were written specifically to keep certain people out of certain neighborhoods by making cheap housing illegal there. The size floor was a wall, and the wall was aimed at the poor. That is not my theory. Planning historians have documented it plainly. The ninth design is the cordwood house. You build the walls out of short logs, laid crosswise like firewood stacked between mortar, the round ends facing in and out. Settlers in Wisconsin and Canada built these from the 1800s on, using log ends too short or too crooked to sell. Waste wood, made into a wall with beautiful natural insulation in the mortar joints. Cordwood homes over 100 years old still stand in the northern woods. The material is often free, cut from your own trees or from a scrap pile. But try to permit one, and the inspector has no code for it, and again the house with no box becomes an outlaw. The 10th is the rammed earth wall, and this one is ancient. You put damp soil into a form, and you pound it, ram it, until it compacts into something like sandstone, then you move the form up and do it again. The Great Wall of China has rammed earth sections that have stood for over 2,000 years. Sections of it are older than the whole idea of a mortgage. Rammed earth walls are massive, fireproof, soundproof, and they hold temperature beautifully. In the American Southwest, people built with earth for centuries before the code writers arrived. The material is the ground. And yet the modern permit demands testing and engineering that turns a free wall into an expensive one. Are you seeing the pattern now? Every single one of these has three things in common. The material is free, or nearly free. It has a track record of lasting 50, 100, 500 years. And it is effectively banned, not by a rule that says it is unsafe, but by a rule that leaves it out, prices it out, or sizes it out. I want to keep naming them because the sheer number is the point. The 11th, adobe brick, sun-dried mud, and straw, the building block of the entire Southwest for hundreds of years, now buried under engineering requirements. The 12th, the wattle and daub, a woven stick lattice packed with mud, the medieval poor man's wall that housed Europe for 1,000 years. The 13th, the log cabin built with hand tools and no milled lumber, the icon of American self-reliance, which in many modern subdivisions would violate covenants on site. The 14th, the underground or earth-sheltered home, built into a slope with soil over the roof, naturally holding that steady 50-something degree earth temperature I mentioned, cutting, heating, and cooling to almost nothing. The 15th, the papercrete home, made from soaked waste paper mixed with a little cement into a lightweight insulating block built from the recycling bin. The 16th, the pallet house, framed from the wooden shipping pallets that businesses give away by the thousands and pay to dispose of. The 17th, the container home, built from a used shipping container that once cost as little as a couple $1,000s, steel already engineered to stack 9 high and cross oceans, and yet banned or fought in countless residential zones for looking industrial. The 18th, the yurt, the round felt and lattice dwelling that housed the people of the Central Asian steppe for 3,000 years through some of the harshest winters on Earth, now classified as a temporary structure you cannot legally call home. The 19th, the tar paper shack refined, the humble board and paper cabin that housed millions during the Depression, cheap, warm enough, and utterly forbidden now. The 20th, the grain bin home, a galvanized steel farm silo converted to living space, cheap and cyclone tough. The 21st, the ferrocement dome, a thin shell of cement over a wire frame, incredibly strong for the material used, developed and proven decades ago, and used almost nowhere for homes. The 22nd, the slip-form stone house, where you pour a little concrete into a moving form and press in stones gathered free from your own land, a technique a couple named Helen and Scott Nearing used to build stone homes by hand, by themselves, on almost no money, and wrote about in the 1950s. The 23rd, the bottle wall, where glass bottles set in mortar make a colored, insulating, free wall from what others throw away. The 24th, the sandbag emergency shelter, the direct ancestor of the earthbag home, dirt-filled sacks that armies trusted with soldiers' lives. 24 designs, every one real, every one cheap. Every one either banned outright or strangled by a code that has no place for it. I laid them all out on my table, and I could feel there was a 25th, the one underneath all of them, the one that explained why any of this was ever knowledge worth burying. And that is the one the trail finally led me to at 2 in the morning. Here is how I found it. I was chasing down where all these minimum standards came from, and I kept hitting references to a federal effort in the middle of the Great Depression to help ordinary people house themselves. And that led me to a set of United States Department of Agriculture and government publications from the 1930s, farmers' bulletins, plans for homes that a family could build themselves for almost nothing, published and mailed out by the government to teach self-reliance. The one that stopped me cold was from 1936. A plan and a method for a home built almost entirely from packed earth, with detailed instructions any farm family could follow, published by the government itself, endorsed, promoted, encouraged. The exact kind of home that today, in most of the country, you cannot get a permit to build. Sit with that. The same government that once printed and mailed the instructions for building a nearly free earthen home to help poor families survive, later stood behind the wall of codes that made those very homes illegal. In one generation, self-reliance went from a virtue the state taught you to a violation the state fined you for. But the 1936 Bulletin held one more thing, and this is the real treasure. The 25th design, the secret at the bottom of the whole dig. It was not a wall, it was a principle, stated plainly in that era's building guidance. And once I understood it, every one of these 24 designs suddenly made sense as one single idea. The principle was this: thermal mass plus your own labor equals a nearly free home. Every design I found was just a different way of getting a large mass of cheap, dense material, dirt, stone, straw, earth, wrapped around a living space, using nothing but the work of your own hands. The mass holds the temperature steady, so you barely pay to heat or cool it. The free material means you barely pay to build it, and your own labor means you owe no one. That is the whole secret. That is what was buried. Not one clever trick, but the entire idea that a person could house themselves from the ground under their feet and their own two hands, and never owe a bank, a utility, or a landlord a single dollar for the roof over their head. And here is the piece of it you can use this week. No land required, straight from that same thermal mass principle. Inside any room you already rent or own, you can borrow the mass trick. Fill jugs and containers with water and place them where the sun hits through your window during the day. Water is one of the cheapest, densest heat-storing materials there is. It soaks up the sun's warmth all day and releases it slowly into your room all evening for free. Farmers and greenhouse growers have used water barrels as heat batteries for over a century. A row of dark-colored water jugs on a sunny sill is a Depression-era heat battery you can build for nothing. Do the same in reverse for summer. That same water mass, kept in the shade, absorbs heat from the room and steadies the temperature, taking the sharp edge off the worst of the afternoon. It is the earth-sheltered home and the 3-foot sod wall shrunk down to a few jugs on your floor. Same principle, same physics, free. That is the treasure at the end of the trail. Not a house you cannot afford to build. A principle you can start using tonight, and if you ever do get a scrap of land, the very method the government once mailed to farmers to set them free. So here is what I keep coming back to. Now that I have followed this all the way down, they did not take these homes from us because they fell down. They took them because they stood up too well for too little and left too many of us owing nothing to anyone. What was buried was not a building. It was the plain idea that you can take care of yourself. If you are the kind of person who would rather know the truth that got left out of the story than be sold a comfortable version of it, then you already belong here on the trail with the rest of us digging these things back up. And I want to hear from you. Of all 25, tell me which one you would build if there were no code stopping you: the dugout, the sod house, the earth bag, the water jug heat battery, or the buried 1936 earthen home. Pick one and write it in the comments right now. Just the name. I read them, and I want to know where your mind went. And while you are at it, tell me what state you are watching from so we can see the map of where this knowledge still lives. If you want to keep digging up what was quietly taken out of the rule books, come with us, because this is what we do here. We find the lost ways ordinary people use to survive well on almost nothing. Next time I am pulling on a thread I did not finish today, that federal effort in the 1930s that mailed free home plans to farmers, and the story of exactly who decided those plans should stop, and why the mailings quietly ended. That thread goes somewhere I did not expect, and I want you there when I reach the bottom of it. If you'd like to see that 1936 federal pamphlet design, start to finish, I put the whole thing inside my membership, the Thrifty Ways Circle. It picks up right where we just stopped. In there, you can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You'd be joining thousands of thrifty folks just like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime, one click.